Brethren, here we go again, Master Craftsman philosophy, as we dig further down into the wells of morals and dogma. We're about to begin section 7, which marks our 20th quiz, and our entrance into the Council of Kadosh. So some exciting things here. We're going to cover the 19th, the 20th, 21st, and 22nd degrees in this section. Again, we're doing each one of these lectures degree by degree. So these will be some of these in this section are going to be fairly short based on the length of the lecture. But just as a reference, page 387 is where our first lecture begins, Grand Pontiff. We're going to dig into that now. If you're participating in the Master Craftsman Study Group in the Valley of St. Louis, remember, you always want to read the material before you listen to these lectures. So keep that in mind. We're about to get started. We're excited to have you. Let's dive in more into the lectures and work of the Grand Pontiff. All right, again, section 7. We're diving into a whole new level of discussion with the Council of Kadosh, which is an exciting piece of work. Beginning this section, we're going to cover Grand Pontiff, the Grand Master of all symbolic lodges, the Prussian Knight or Noahite, and the Prince of Libanus or Knight of the Royal Axe. Specifically, in this lecture, we're tackling the 19th degree Grand Pontiff, and I'm excited to do that with you. Fascinating degree, a degree that I think probably doesn't get enough attention in a lot of ways, but is well worth our consideration. It forms part of the triad of degrees, beginning with the 17th degree, flowing into the 18th, and then completed here in the 19th. We see a continued relevance of the symbolism shown to us in the 17th degree regarding the book of Revelations, the final battle between light and darkness, good and evil, all those things that come with that. We see some further elaboration on the book of Revelations, specifically with an explanation into the concepts of the arrival of New Jerusalem and a new world which will shine beyond. The degree, of course, is styled Grand Pontiff, which often makes folks scratch their heads a little bit, but much like Knight Rose Croix, does not refer directly to Christianity or in particular the Roman Catholic Church, where pontiff is a frequently used terminology in regards to the Pope. Pontiff here comes, of course, from the Latin word ponti, meaning bridge, and facere, or farce, meaning to make. Hence, the pontiff is a bridge builder. And Pike's lecture teaches us in the course of this that a man's actions are a bridge to his own immortality and to the future of mankind. Each man must act as a bridge builder to the future, being a good example to his children, his peers, and his brethren. And we're specifically told that in the work, and we'll cover that. Now, you may hear some connotation, some discussion in the work. We'll touch on it briefly in the lecture about this idea of New Jerusalem. It is a tracing board shown to us through description. And in the degree, this tracing board is explained to us in full detail. We're told it has no temple or house because deity dwells throughout it. It's supposed to be the abode of man and the divine in a world after the defeat of evil and darkness and all those things that can come into relation with that, exemplifying that triumphant nature of good and divine. So, very early on, we're told that the true Mason labors for the benefit of those who are to come after him, for the advancement and the improvement of his race. And this lecture is profoundly beautiful in that discussion. I would encourage you to read it in full, which hopefully you have as part of this program. We're told that it is a poor ambition which contents himself with the limits of a single life. All men, of course, deserve to live. They desire to, and within themselves, they innately desire to survive their own funerals and to live afterward. And the good they have done for mankind should be our goal, rather than fading into the shadows. With that being said, we need to realize that our actions continue long after we have died. Consider, in part, the Spartan mother who gave her son a shield and said, without it or upon it, and afterwards shared the governance with the legislators of her people. This idea of service beyond self, dedication beyond normal purpose. The widow who gave Marion the fiery arrows to burn her own house that it may not shelter the enemy. All these little instances are pointed out. And it talks even, a little bit about the story of Moses and the fact that little was saw of giving him aid and things like that, and the repercussions that would follow. Pike, of course, points out all these different instances. He notes Napoleon, died on a barren rock in exile. His bones were borne to France by the son of a king, and they rest in the Hospital of Invalids in the great city. His thoughts still govern France. He, and not the people, dethroned the Bourbons and drove out the last king of the House of Orleans into exile. He, in his coffin, not the people, voted the crown to the third Napoleon, and he, not the generals of France and England, led the united forces against the grim northern despotism. Pike points out this fact that Napoleon's gone, but the impacts of what he did last far longer. Muhammad announced to the Arabian idolaters his new creed. There is no God, there is but one God, and Muhammad, like Moses and Christ, is his apostle. And for many years unaided, and then with the help of his family and friends, when they became disciples, last with an army, he taught and preached the Quran, the religion of a wild Arabian enthusiast converted the fiery tribes of a vast desert. The laws of Muhammad still govern a fourth of the human race, and the Turk, the Arab, the Moor, the Persian, the Hindu still obey the prophet. They pray with their faces turned toward Mecca. He, and not the living, rule and reign in the fairest portions of the Orient. Confucius, of course, still enacts laws for China, and his thoughts and the ideas of Peter the Great govern Russia. Plato and other sages of antiquity reign as kings of philosophy. The great statesmen of the past preside over the councils of nations. Burke still lingers in the halls of commons. The influences of Webster and Calhoun are still conflicting and rent asunder the American states themselves, and all the doctrines of each is the law and oracle from which the Holy of Holies of the state is consecrated with. A faith preached and proclaimed at the cannon's mouth and consecrated by rivers of blood. Pike here emphasizes this idea of all these people who've come before, left their mark in a way, and it's lasted after them. It is the dead that govern, and the living only live amongst it. This constant idea of continuation. He talks about long ago the temple built by Solomon and our ancient brethren sank into ruin when the Assyrians sacked Jerusalem. The holy city is a mass of hovel cowering under the dominion of the crescent, and the Holy Land is a desert. The kings of Egypt and Assyria who are contemporaries of Solomon are forgotten. Their histories are mere fables. The ancient Orient is shattered like a wreck, bleaching upon the shores of time. The wolf and jackal howl in the ruins of Thebes and of Tyre. The sculptured images in temples and palaces in Babylon and Nineveh are dug from the ruins and carried to strange lands. But the quiet and peaceful order, of which the son of a poor Phoenician widow was once a grand master, has continued onward to last. So Pike begins this section talking about this idea of ideas carrying onward and lasting, and those ideas that made profound impact having a resonance of great value. And he ends this section talking about the idea of the Masonic fraternity, or at least the allegorical legend of the fraternity, and the fact that its founding at an ancient time, even when the temple was burnt asunder, when kings and nations of great expanse and beauty around it were destroyed, the craft still exists. It still moves on and influences, defying the angry waves of time and the storms of persecution. I'm reminded of the fellow craft degree, and specifically in the liturgy and charge, which I used to, I still do, at various times, where we talk about the fact that the destruction of war, time, and all those other things have laid waste and destroyed many valuable monuments of antiquity on which the utmost expanse of human genius has been employed. I'm paraphrasing here. And yet, the fraternity still goes forward. The craft still exists. It is the dead that govern, the living only obey. And we do not know who among the dead control our own personal destinies, perhaps. The universal human race is bound together by those influences and sympathies, which are the truest sense do make men's fates. Humanity is the unit of which man is but a small and simple fraction. Thus we obey the dead, and thus we shall, as the living, when we are dead, for weal and woe, obey us, the living will. The thoughts of the past are the laws of the present and the future. It is the great ambition, then, of a true and genuine Mason, knowing the slow process by which the deity brings about great results, that he does not expect to reap as well as what he sows in a single life. It is the inflexible fate and the noblest destiny, with the exception of the great and good, to work, so that others may reap the harvest of their labors. Understanding that, realizing that what we do now may not have immediate result. It may not have immediate profit. It may not have immediate push to make us excel in all those great ways. But knowing that, understanding that, we can work to do the best we can. To sow that others may reap, to work and plant for those who will occupy the world when we are dead, to project influences far into the future and live beyond our time, to rule as kings of thought over men who are yet unborn, to bless with glorious gifts of truth and light and liberty those who will neither know our name as a giver nor care in what grave our ashes are reposed, is the true office of a Mason and the proudest destiny of a man. I think that says a lot about craft, a lot about our duty to humanity, the things that we set ourselves to, this idea that we shouldn't be concerned about our name on something, our name attached to something, yet the results, the efforts we put in, we know will bear fruit for good. And that's really something I think beautiful to that. All the great and beneficent operations of nature are produced by slow and often imperceptible degrees. Only the work that is destructive, negative, perhaps, and devastating is violent and rapid. Think to natural disasters. Pike talks about volcanoes, earthquakes, tornadoes. They leap suddenly, full of life and energy. They smite the unexpected. He talks about Vesuvius, of course, burying Pompeii in a single night, Lisbon falling to earthquakes, all these things. And then he tells a beautiful story in this idea of sowing that others may reap. And I find it to be one of the, in personal sense, one of the more impactfully beautiful, simple stories that teaches a lesson that Pike kind of talks through here in his work. He speaks basically of a Saxon, of a soldier during the Norman conquest, when the neck of a prostate Saxon England was squashed. A wandering barbarian, not knowing where they were on the shores of England, and I'm going to paraphrase this story quite simply, is walking along, and with hand or foot, he covers an acorn that had fallen from a tree. Going about his way, he could have not known nor cared, and his journey moved. He died, he's forgotten. But the acorn was planted, and it laid there still. Slowly, a tender shoot stole gently up, and fed by light and air and frequent dew, it put forth leaves. It lived because other animals would not bother it, and other feet did not crush it. The years marched on, and the tree grew and grew. And as it grew, things came to pass. William, the Norman bastard, William the Conqueror, dies as he parcels his land out among his barons. Yet the sapling grows. It grows taller and further. A hunter sleeps under his shade. Richard the Lionheart goes to fight at Acre and Ascalon. John's bold barons wrestled from him the great charter, and lo, the sapling now is a strong and healthy tree, and it still is growing, thrusting its arms wider, lifting its head toward the heavens in defiant storms. All the while, men like Columbus sail to the western Atlantic. Cortez, Pizarro bathe the cross in blood. The Puritans, the Huguenots, the Cavaliers, the followers of Penn seek refuge across the ocean. And yet the great oak stood, firm-rooted, vigorous, stately, over all the forests, as it becomes a stout and hale-old tree, fit to furnish timbers for a ship to carry the thunderous great republics guns across the world. And yet, if one had stood just a moment in any of those times, would they have been able to know that? Would they have seen that great ability to come from that feeble shooter sapling? And Pike talks about that fact, this idea that this acorn planted centuries before grows and grows, and no one would have known the difference or the whys or the possible future it had. Inevitably become a great ship and help the British Empire expand. He then talks, of course, about many centuries ago, before when Chaldean shepherds watched the stars or Khufu built the pyramids. No one would have ever thought about the reciprocations of those actions of which came and followed thereafter. Thus, God has chosen to create. And thus we see the aggregate of human endeavors and nature's existence within the divine. He then continues to discuss this idea of how our efforts take dedication, they take time, and they're slow. Yet the negative is quite swift. Think of the length of time it took to build Solomon's temple and how quickly it was destroyed. The effort, the years, the men, the sweat, and then simply swept away by the legionnaires. A single arm, as it says, of a rude, barbarous Assyrian spearman or a drunken Roman or Goth legionnaire, moved by senseless impulse, flung a blazing brand with no agency. A few short hours later, the temple destroyed. Therefore, faint not, nor be weary in doing well, but be not discouraged either at men's apathy, nor disgusted with their follies, nor tiring at their indifference. Care not for the returns and results, but only see what there is to do and do it. Leave the results for God. Soldier of the cross, sworn knight of justice, truth, and toleration, good knight and true, be patient and work. This beautiful calling here from Pike almost sounds like a sermon of sorts. Work because there is work. Fulfill your duty because there is your duty. Understand that it takes time. Put that effort in, and those results may not be seen. The Apocalypse, the sublime Kabbalistic and prophetic summary of all occult figures, divides its image into 3 septenaries, after which each of these there's a silence in heaven. There are 7 seals to be opened, and that is to say, 7 mysteries to know, 7 difficulties to overcome, 7 trumpets to sound, and 7 cups to empty. Pike puts that at the end of this section, and perhaps it seems out of place for you in the way of context and what we're discussing. But he's here reiterating the fact that there is a process to things. There is a cycle. And while that cycle may not be fully within our knowledge, there are duties to occur. There are things that must happen for light to succeed. And we're told that the apocalypse itself is to those who receive this degree the apotheosis of the sublime faith which aspires to God alone and despises all the pomp and works of Lucifer, Lucifer the light bearer, a strange and mysterious name given to the spirit of darkness. Lucifer the morning sun, it is he who bears the light, and with its splendors intolerably blinds feeble, sensual, or selfish souls? Doubt it not, for traditions are full of divine revelation and inspiration. I share that part briefly. I encourage you to read on page 396 of Morals and Dogma, that's section 28, and then consider some of the discussion points regarding the Taxil hoax, if you will, or the Lucifer hoax, that are also brought up in the introduction on page 55 and 59. There's quite a bit here to consider in that scope, and Pike draws our attention to it in contradictions, but this is also a paragraph used heavily against us as Masons, and I think reading through that and understanding this chapter, you're going to see where he was going and the context of it as a whole. Of course, in that same sentiment, the New Testament, of course, provides proof that the word Lucifer does not mean the devil. It is also used as a title for Jesus. And biblical scholars will tell you that the Lucifer mentioned in the Old Testament of the Bible refers several things. It's the name of a planet, Venus, and it's metaphorically applied to a Babylonian king. You can look to Isaiah 14:12 for that. Hebrew Bible calls Lucifer Heliel bin Shakur, or day star, son of the dawn. In wrapping this section, you'll find that the final portion of the discussion on this degree regards the apocalypse and the symbolic attributes of God. We're told very clearly that the apocalypse indeed is a book as obscure as the Zohar being that seminal text upon the Kabbalah. And we're told that the apocalypse is the complete embodiment of occultism. And it contains more meanings than words, expressions that are figurative as poetry and exact as numbers. The more the great hierophants were at pains to conceal their absolute science, the more they sought to add grandeur and multiply its symbols. Consider that and weigh that. There are three absolute principles which we should be aware of, but they are all one principle. Four elementary forms that are but one, all forming a single whole compounded in the idea and form. The three principles are being is real, and being is logic. I'd encourage you to explore those and consider those. Again, we've already talked a little bit about the importance of reviewing the taxal hosts, and consider the relevance of this lecture in regards to this idea that the dead govern and the living obey. What is the point Pike's trying to draw us to? What is the point Pike's trying to lead us forward with? I end this lecture briefly just with the sentiment of the last line of this lecture, as I occasionally will do. As Pike talks about this idea of the divine and the creator and existence, he reminds us that all of these concepts can be expressed in the single proposition of the great Egyptian hierophant, and he's referencing Hermes Trismegistus. What is superior is as that which is inferior, and what is below is that which is above, to form the marvels of the unity. My brothers, I thank you again for joining us as we dive further into morals and dogma, as we look at this in the Master Craftsman Philosophy section. I hope you enjoyed it. We look forward to continuing this as we dive next into the 20th degree. Take some notes, read the sections, and we'll catch up with you soon. Have a good evening, good morning, or good night. We are glad you were here, and we're excited to keep moving forward.